Hello and welcome to the Addicts Anonymous podcast. I'm your host, Jamar. Today's episode 112, and we're going to be interviewing Shawn S. How you doing, Shawn?
Well, I'm well. Thank you for having me on.
Oh, I like that. You're speaking proper English. Most people say I'm doing good. You said I'm doing well. I learned a thing a long time ago. Someone said to me, Superman does good, you do well.
I've been through treatment enough times to know that that good's not a feeling.
So. Yeah, exactly. It's an action, but I digress. So let's get started here. Let's dive in. Let's talk about your childhood and growing up.
All right. So, I was born in East Boston, Massachusetts. I'm one of 12 children, Irish Catholic family.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. 9 of us are from my mom. My dad had 3 previous. So I grew up with the 9 in the house. My childhood, it's not, I guess it's not as extremely bad as a lot of other people. A lot of it was probably self-inflicted through emotional distress, but my father was a pretty bad alcoholic. We grew up poor, so he was a Marine. He was real strict, a lot of like getting grounded, a lot of I was never doing good enough, no matter what I did. And, I excelled in sports and I never got recognition for that. And, it just kind of like, I just never felt like I was good enough for anybody or anything. My self-esteem was always extremely low. I did well in school, but, I acted out all the time to get recognition. I was the class clown. I was always getting in trouble. I was stealing from the stores to make the kids around me think that I was cool. I was getting into fights to show that I wasn't afraid. I was trying to prove myself in all the wrong ways. I needed that attention that I didn't feel like I was, I know now what I was doing, but, back then as a kid, I didn't know any difference. I was just acting out. So, I grew up in a religious family. I was an altar boy for 5 years, when I was real young, 8 to 12 years old, and I acted the same way in church. I would steal stuff from the rectory, I would do mass, I would act like a clown, and I just thought that I was funny and people seemed to like me, that, I never really was malicious toward anybody. The kids that I grew up with, we all played sports together, and we fist fought with each other. It was just the way that I was brought up. But my dad, being an alcoholic, introduced me to alcohol at a very, very young age. I was in the bars with him, shooting pool, throwing darts when I was 7, 8, 9 years old.
Oh, wow. That's really, really, really young.
Yeah. And then it just progressed. As I got my first drunk was when I was 10. My father bought a case of champagne for my baseball team because we were in the World Series for the city. We ended up losing, so me and him drank that. That was my first memory of actually being intoxicated and passing out, my first blackout.
I can't imagine that, because I think about that sometimes when people tell me their stories about how they did drugs or alcohol with their parents. I can't imagine doing that with my daughter.
Yeah, I know, me too. I can't say that I never have, because when my kids were in their upper teens, I was still drinking then, not so much drugging, but I was still drinking at the time. So I would, like at family functions, I would drink and they would be drinking. And my son got into weed for a little while when he was like 15 or 16, and I would smoke with him, but it never really progressed like it did with my dad. Like I wasn't hanging out at the bars with them. I wasn't, getting pissed drunk with them. Not that I was any better. I just wasn't, it didn't start off at a very young age like it did with me. They picked up their own thing on their own. They dibble dabbled with whatever they wanted to through the high school years, the experimental years, like you want people call it. But my mother wasn't an alcoholic, she's never a drug addict. So I had that little bit of sanity there, maybe being through my my early years. So anytime I got in trouble with my dad, my mom was always had my back, but it didn't like change anything. By the time I was 13, 14 years old, I was drinking on weekends with my friends and smoking pot. And then that just progressed, through high school into everything and anything you can think of.
Going back a little bit, when you first drank, what did you do? What do you remember feeling?
I mean, the first time that I got drunk, because the times that I had, sips of beer or tastes of shots, it never really did anything to me. I didn't really like the taste. I didn't get no effect from it. But the first time that I did get drunk, I just remember it wasn't like, you hear some people say, oh, it was that aha moment. I finally felt like I found where I'm supposed to be. It wasn't like that for me. It was
No,
more confusion, um, you know, uncoordinated and pass out, you know. That's all I remember. I remember waking up on my kitchen floor, not knowing what happened.
yeah.
Yeah.
So when you were really young, how were you in school?
My grades were always good. I didn't have to apply myself. I always fooled around in class. I would get thrown out of class all the time. Like I said, I was the class clown. I wanted that attention. School came easy to me, you know. So I always had good grades up until high school. Up until I really got into doing my own thing. You know, I always had good grades. Did well on tests. Never did homework. You know, it was one of those things that just came easy to me.
You're a smart guy. That's good.
Not too smart.
Not too smart.
Not too smart for my own good, though.
No, definitely not. That's I think something we all have in common. None of us are smart enough for our own good. So, what was your social life like? You said you went out every weekend drinking and stuff like that. What about boyfriends or girlfriends, stuff like that?
Yeah, I mean, I started dating in, middle school. Not really, whatever you want to experience at that age. Phone calls, hanging out with girls. Not doing anything sexual or anything like that, but not until high school. But yeah, so when I did get in high school and I started dating girls and started hanging out on the weekends or the weeknights, even going to parties. And I was drinking every weekend, and from the very beginning, even like when I said when I was 10 years old, I blacked out. That was my first drunk. I continued that. I was the blackout drinker. Like I would just drink and drink and drink until I was blacked out, spinning, throwing up, blacking out. Because I thought it was fun, and I got along. Like it took the insecurity and the low self-esteem and the social anxiety out of me, so I could go to these parties where I didn't feel like I was like welcome. I know that I was welcome, but I just didn't feel like it was the right place for me to be. I didn't know how to socialize very well without being, a clown. I didn't know how to talk to people like on an intellectual level without feeling like they didn't understand what I was saying. But alcohol took all that away. The drugs took all of that away. You know,
So it helped you.
it did, yeah. Okay, yeah.
Because that's one of the things I mentioned a few times in my podcast. Have you ever heard of Gabor Mate?
What?
Gabor Mate, he's a speaker
Oh
and
yeah, yeah. Yep.
yeah. So he says we have to also look at not just what the drugs were doing to us negatively, but we have to look at the things that it did good for us. Like, okay, it helped me with anxiety, it helped me talk to people, helped me meet girls. Because then you could see where your problems were. Okay, why can't I do that without it? You know what I mean? So you need to identify the good things that did for you also. I always found that interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard it a million times from other people, and I'm sure you have too. They worked until they didn't.
Yeah.
The drugs and alcohol worked to my advantage until they didn't. They made me who I thought I wanted to be. They made me who I thought everybody else wanted me to be until they didn't. So there's no reason why I would ever have stopped at that young of an age without any consequences, because I did go to school. I did hold a job. In my late teens, I was with my kid's mother. Got out of high school and had a couple of children and held very good jobs and made money and bought a home, and I mean all of that. So I didn't really suffer the consequences of it. So I didn't think that it was a problem. And everybody around me, family included, extended family, a couple of my siblings, everybody was doing it. I was hanging out with my dad getting drunk. That right there was an indicator that everything that's just fine. Everybody's doing this. If you don't have any issue, you get up, you go to work every day, and you're all right.
Well, it's a good old fashioned saying, you are who you surround yourself with. So if everyone's doing something, you're going to be doing the same thing, most likely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Your 5 closest friends, and that's what you're going to be like.
Yeah, exactly. That's why the Buddha, I love Buddhism. I like reading a lot about it. He says wise men surround themselves with wise men. Because if you surround yourself with unwise men, you're going to become unwise. So,
I
so
never, I didn't recognize that until obviously later on in my life.
oh, none of us do. We have to go through all the shit before we recognize the light at the end of the tunnel.
Absolutely.
So how old were you when you met your child or your mother of your child?
We were high school sweethearts. So my ex-wife, we met when we were 17. Had our first child at 19 and second child at 23. Got married, had a home when we were 19. Sold that, bought another house when, I don't know, I was like 27, 28. I mean, we did well, we both did well together. She's not like me. She's the type of woman that could, have a couple of drinks and then, call it a night. She's the type of woman that could sniff a couple lines and stop, once a year, like on New Year's Eve or something. And that used to drive me crazy because once I start, I can't stop.
Oh, me neither. I'm writing an article right now on the cocaine. It makes me think about all those days. I was never able to stop. And I'm also learning about how they make cocaine. And some of the first processes is putting, I think, drain cleaner or battery acid, definitely kerosene or gasoline. And then they throw in some cement. And they mix all this crap together. It's amazing. And then it's obviously 100% pure down in Colombia when they're, processing it and stuff like that. By the time it gets to us, it's like 15% pure. So by the time everyone cuts it, because all along the supply chain, people are cutting it to make more money. And by the time it gets up our nose, it's 15%.
And you don't think about that when you're using it,
No, absolutely. You don't give a shit. It's just...
I'm injecting gasoline into my system. Like, you don't think about that,
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, it's crazy the way they actually make that shit. So tell me a little bit more about what kind of social life you had after high school. Were you going out with the guys drinking, or were you more, because I know you said you're doing good, so what were you doing as far as your home life? How was that going?
So I will say, my home life obviously was not healthy. I worked 2 and 3 jobs all through my, from the time that I was 19 until I was 23. I always had 2 or 3 jobs, and one of them I worked at a bar. I was the bouncer on the weekend. So, I worked my day job and I would go to my evening job, and then like Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I would work at a bar, and I'd be out till 3:00 in the morning. Days that, like Sundays, say, or the days that I came home at a decent hour, like 9 or 10 at night, I'd be out running around with my friends, and I'd be out doing dumb shit with women, while I had a child at home and a wife at home. That was very irresponsible. But I mean, I worked, so I made tons of money, so I didn't see a problem with that either. The bills are getting paid, the kids are taken care of. I deserve to have fun, and I was still life of the party because I was hanging out and getting high and getting drunk and going to house parties and hanging out at the bars and going to concerts. And, the majority of that, the wife was left at home, and I was doing whatever I wanted to do, and I didn't see a problem with it.
That's one of the worst things, I think, is when you're a self-sufficient drug addict or alcoholic, because like you said, there's really no reason to stop, because most people, are hitting rock bottoms where they're unemployed, they got no money left, they got no family left, their wife has left them, they took the kids. But yeah, it's a shame,
In my early 20s, that's when I started seeing some minor consequences. Like I was fighting all the time with my ex-wife. You know, I would argue with my family. I stopped showing up to family events and functions, and that, you know, I would make plans and then I would break them. You know, because I'm a heroin addict too. So, you know, and I was dope sick. It didn't matter what was going on. I was going to chase my dope. You know, I was going to fix my sickness. That took precedence over everything. You know,
So you
that's
were
when I
drinking, and I'll keep going.
Yeah, I started taking Oxycontin when I was 17 because I broke my foot from a prescription. And by the time I was, I don't know, 20 years old, you know, the scripts stopped coming and, you know, the heroin started flowing. And by the time I was 21, I was using the needle. And, you know, once I figured out that you could put anything in a needle for the next 17 years, I did. But it was the majority of it was heroin. It slowed me down a little bit on the drinking, but then my social life in my mid-20s started to, you know, fall apart. Then I just started, all I was doing was working, chasing the dope man, coming home and sleeping. Working, chasing the dope man, coming home and sleeping. I didn't have any family life. I didn't have any social life. I stopped going to the bars. You know, I wasn't going to family functions. So for a long time, over a decade, I lived that way. There was a couple, you know, a couple jail, a couple prison sentences, couple rehabs, like steady rehab, just a couple like turn and burns. You go to detox, you get cleaned up, you get back out. I did that a few times. You know, that's how my life really stayed until my mid to late 30s. It was just that circle of progression. You know, get clean for a week, and then, you know, go on a run for a couple of years until, you know, the money was drained, the relationships were drained. I'd end up in prison, and then I'd get out, and I would just do it over and over again. And I did that for years. No social. So everything the drugs did for me, they started to take away from me. You know?
Who first introduced you to heroin and as far as the hex? I know you said you were on the Oxycontin when you were 17. Once those prescriptions ran out, were you the one that went seeking heroin, or did someone say to you, "Hey, buddy, you know, this will help you"?
Yeah, well, this kid that I grew up with, he was one of my closest friends growing up. We were both taking pills, because even though I was taking Oxycontin prescribed, I was still buying them off the street at the time. And when they were prevalent back then. You're talking the late 90s, early 2000s. And, you know, when they were running out and I couldn't get scripts anymore and I couldn't buy scripts from people, he turned me on to it. He said it was something, because nobody I really knew did heroin. It was more like just everybody did coke and drank. So, you know, well, pop pills. Oxycontin was, you know, was a pandemic up in Massachusetts for a long time. But yeah, he told me it was just a cheaper and a stronger way to go. And I got turned on to it. I sniffed it for like a year. Didn't really understand, even though I had been taking pills for years and I started doing heroin for a short amount of time. I didn't really know what dope sickness was. I never put the two and two together. It never clicked in my mind until I was at work one day. I was like 20 or 21 years old, maybe 21, 22. And I started getting really sick at work. So I called my friend. I'm like, "Hey, I'm not feeling good, man. You know, can you get me anything to make me feel better?" He's like, "Oh man, you're dope sick." And I'm like, "I'm dope sick." Because I always had enough pills and, you know, I had enough of everything prior to that it didn't really settle in. If I wasn't feeling well, I thought that I just had a rough night. I must be hungover. I must not have had enough sleep. I must not have eaten right. You know, I just didn't know what dope sickness was.
What kind of symptoms did you have?
Oh, I had the chills and runny nose and watery eyes and, you know, diarrhea. And then he brought me a couple bags to work. And once that I did them, all the symptoms went away. And from that moment on, it was a game changer in my mind, because now I knew that this took care of this. So, you know, then the psychological part of it kicks in. And anytime you're feeling a little off, you're like, "Oh, I must be dope sick. Got to get more, got to get more." And then once I got introduced to the needle, I mean, there was no stopping me. Like literally.
Was it the same friend that introduced you to the? No, who was this?
One of the guys that I worked with. Yeah. I worked for his dad for a few years at a butcher shop. Yeah, he turned me onto it.
What did
And
he just say to you one day? He's like, check this out. Did he know that
yeah,
you
he's
were
like,
dope sick
yeah,
or something?
yeah, I was dope sick, and he's like, you ever shoot it up? And I'm like, no, no, I don't want to. He's like, oh, you got to try it. He's like, I'll do it for you, so that I can show you that it's safe. Like he did it, and I saw that he was like, all right, and he did the process for me, and I mean, it was a whole nother experience, and like from that time, that first time, I had this euphoric feeling that I've never felt since, and I chased it, always chased it. The only time I ever came close to getting that first feeling was when I had like short amounts of sobriety from either being locked up or, going through a detox and getting back out. So your tolerance is extremely low. That's the only time I've ever come close to that first time. And I always wanted that again.
That also kills a lot of people because their tolerance goes down. They get out of rehab or they get out of jail or whatever it is, and they do the same amount they used to do, and they just overdose because their tolerance isn't that high anymore.
It happened to me. I think I was 28, maybe 29. Yeah, somewhere around there. My timeline, my timeline's a little messed up. Obviously, my my recollection of a lot of stuff is a little foggy sometimes. But yeah, I was in my late 20s, and I had just done 5 months, and I got out, and the first thing I did was go pick up some coke and some heroin, and I was doing speedballs through the night, and the next day I had overdosed. I had gone to my mother's house, and I had just, I guess, fell out at my mother's house. That was my first overdose. I spent 4 days in the hospital, and right when they released me from the hospital, I was on the train at Mass General in Boston, and I just took the Orange Line over to Charlestown and got dope right away again. Because I wasn't feeling good. I know how to fix it. The OD didn't scare me.
That's amazing. That's crazy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm glad that that I'm clean. I'm clean now, because all this stuff that's on the street now is just crazy. Not even just the fentanyl, the meth, the coke, the fentanyl, all this other crazy shit they talk about, like bath salts and flocka and whatever the fucking crocodile shit. There's so much crap out there that I just never had to experience, and I'm grateful that I've never had to experience that, because who knows, I'd be dead. I don't know how half of these kids are even alive. The mortality rate is extremely high because of this fentanyl and everything. But
yeah, they put fentanyl, like you said, crack, crystal meth, everything, cocaine.
We do sometimes, it's
Say
fucking
one more
crazy.
time.
In weed too.
Oh yeah.
They're finding fentanyl laced in weed nowadays too.
And one of the reasons is, so some of them, I don't know, some dealers might put it on purpose, but someone said this to me, and I never thought about it. They use the same scale. The person sells fentanyl and they sell weed. So they weigh out the fentanyl, make their little baggies, and then the next thing they're weighing on the scale is weed. So it kind of picks up some of it. That's why it might be testing positive.
I never thought about that, but yeah, that's a good theory,
Yeah, that's like I said, something I never thought of until someone said it to me.
So I bounced around when I was like 30, maybe 20, 29, 30. I started moving around. I moved away from Boston, thought that the geographic change would be good. Me and my kids and my ex-wife, we moved to Georgia. I started doing underground work, tunnel development, like infrastructure work. And, I did that for several years there. And that's when I started seeing, the progression, not just the consequences from like the prisons and the job loss or financial issues. I started seeing health issues, and I was obsessed, like to the max, where I couldn't do anything at all. I couldn't get out of bed without getting high. I couldn't think straight without getting high. I couldn't pick up I couldn't do anything, basically, I wasn't taking care of myself.
You mentioned jail a few times. Two questions. What'd you go to jail for? And then second is, what did your family do when you went to jail?
So when I went, my ex-wife, she like, you know, she's so-called normie. Well, you know, she's not like me anyway. She's been able to handle it. You know, she took care of the responsibility. Plus my family, I come from a real big family. So I have a lot of siblings and my mother. So they always helped out all through my 20s when I was, you know, when I was working or I was out running the streets or I was in jail or prison. My family always stepped in and helped my ex-wife take care of my kids and take care of bills and stuff. But I've been in jail several times for driving without a license, DUI. You know, I've been to prison a few times for armed robbery, for selling methamphetamine. You know, I've been in jail a few times for you know, fighting, you know, destruction of property, you know, just kind of violent stuff, you know. And I'm not really a violent guy, so but you wouldn't know that. You wouldn't know that like when I'm high. You would think differently of me.
Yeah.
Like,
No
you know,
good.
like most of us. Yeah.
Yeah, we become a different person.
Yeah.
So at what point did you realize that you had a problem?
I mean, I knew in my early 20s that I had a problem. When I was getting dope sick all the time, you know, and I couldn't stop. Like when I tried the detox and, you know, that didn't work. And you know, I started not having any kind of a social life. I knew then that I had a problem, and everybody told me I had a problem, but I didn't want to admit to myself that I had a problem. You know, I was trying to fix myself for everybody else. You know, the try to fix the marriage, to be there for the kids, to make my mother happy and not worry, you know, to appease the courts, you know, to just, I was only doing it for everybody else. I was never doing it for me. I just figured that I came to the, you know, I succumbed to the idea that I'm a heroin addict and I'm going to die a heroin addict. And I was all right with that. It's like, yeah, I'll get it under control one of these days. You know, I'll be able to live, you know, I'll be able to live till I'm 60 or 70 years old shooting dope, you know. There's this fantasy in my head, you know, that I'll be able to drink and drug like a normal person one day. You know?
Yeah. It never
But
quite happened that way.
I knew in my early 20s that I had a problem.
So how come you didn't do anything about it?
I didn't care. Honestly, I didn't care. It was the only thing that, even though it was hurting me, it was the only thing that made me feel good at the same time. You know, I was never happy at home. I mean, I always liked to work, so I didn't mind. But even then, I didn't want to go to work. You know, I hated my job, even though I've always been a worker. Just, it was everything. I didn't want to be around my family. And the only time that I could function normal and be social was when I was high. You know, I could deal with being at my mother's house with, you know, 8 or 9 kids and nieces and nephews and everybody running around like just chaos, right? I could deal with that when I was high. I could have like a loving and caring, so-called loving and caring relationship with my ex-wife when I was high. You know, I could be that playful father that took their kids to the park and to the beach and when I was high. So, and when I wasn't, I couldn't do it. I would just, if I wasn't high, I wasn't happy. And I didn't want any part of my life unless I was high, because that's when it was enjoyable. Even though it was ruining jobs in my relationships, you know, I had those little brief moments each day when I was at that point of I don't know how to describe it, but I would have these points throughout the day where I would be just high enough that I would be like happy. You know, I wasn't sick and I wasn't too high that I was like drooling on myself. I was functioning and nobody really said anything when I was like that, because I was being a part of instead of, you know, antisocial and isolated. So they took me at those moments when they could have me, because they just figured that that's who I was. They couldn't fix me. They knew they couldn't fix me. So
When did you finally say you had enough and you needed to get sober? Or was there anything that happened that came, you know, that made this come about?
So when I got clean back in 2014, in 2011, I had left my family in Georgia. I moved to Texas, just with the idea that I was going to go take the job, continue doing tunnel work, take a job in Austin, Texas. I was going to go out there and get myself set up. We were going to sell our house, and they were going to move out and follow me. And I got there, and a month into me being there, I was having so much fun on my own that I put them aside, pushed them aside, and we ended up getting divorced. I ended up, messing around with some women out there, and I ended up having a girlfriend and moving her in, and we stayed together for several years. And she was another one, didn't have no idea about drugging, and she found, I was getting bad. I was at a point where I was really, really bad, and she found heroin and needles and spoon in my pocket, and like that came to an end. And then at that time I was like, oh, I'll just, I'll go to treatment. And when I went to treatment, it was my first real, like, go through detox and stay for 60 days in a building where you're in clinical classes all day. You don't go outside to the real world at all. It's just, that's the first time I experienced doing step work. And yeah, so stuff from that treatment stuck with me, and I've been good with the drugs since. But after I got out of there, I went back on my own again. I want to say I don't really know, but maybe a year and a half I stayed dry. I wasn't drinking or drugging, and I was fucking miserable. And I started taking jobs doing tunnel work in different cities and different states, and I started traveling around again, and I started hooking up with some of the guys that I met in different states. And we were out playing pool one night, and I was the boss. I was the foreman, and I was hanging out with some of the guys that worked for me, and we were playing pool, and everybody's drinking pitchers, and I'm like, you know what? It's been long enough. I haven't been getting high. Alcohol's never really been my problem. I put it away for so long. Heroin's my real problem. Cocaine's my real problem. So I started drinking, and that took off crazy fast. Within, I want to say 4 months, I was, instead of just having a couple of beers with the guys on the weeknights, I was drinking. I was drinking handles a day. I was nips in my work truck, drinking when I woke up so I could get to work, drinking in the middle of the night, a bottle under my bed. Like I was that guy. And I ended up losing that job. And just the progression from the drinking got worse. We're talking probably 2017, 2000. I started drinking again in 2015 or 16, somewhere around there. And by the time it was 2017, I had lost my home, lost my job, lost my relationship, lost my car, and I was doing day labor out in Austin, Texas. I had gone back to Texas. I was doing day labor work just so that I could get a hotel room like every 3 or 4 days so that I could clean up, and then I'd go and I would do day labor jobs making 60, 70 bucks a day. Like People Ready or Labor Max, or, places like that, Staffing Solutions, places like that. I would get day work. And I would feed myself very, very minimal because I didn't really need to eat. I was drinking so much. And, that's how it was. And so my family reached out and they were like, man, you got to come home. I had been living in my car for a little while until they came and repoed my car while I was sleeping in it. Mm-hmm. So that put me on the street, but I continued to try to find work so that I could get a hotel room every once in a while. I would make enough money. Yeah. I was actually finally homeless. Yep. From drinking. Yep. Drinking took me down a path that heroin never did. But I mean, I guess I can't say that it didn't, because heroin took me to prison. It took my family away from me, made me, I lost a lot. I gave away a lot of things on heroin, but it never made me homeless. So I didn't hit that. And I never thought that I was as bad as everybody else because I've never been homeless. I've always had a job and made money. I'm not that guy. I'm not the bum on the street, living under a bridge like the stigma is. And I believe that stigma until it was me, And I stayed that way for, not a long time. I wasn't homeless for a long time because I always found work. And then I ended up coming home back to Massachusetts. In the end of 2017, I moved back to Massachusetts. My sister wanted me to come and stay with her until I got on my feet. But I was still, it took me 4 days to drive from Austin, Texas to Boston, Mass, because I was so drunk the whole way. I would drive a few hours and then drink and pass out, drive a few hours, drink and pass out. So it took me 4 days to make, a day and a half journey. But when I got back, I was drinking so much. My sister that I moved in with, she was an alcoholic too. She drank every day, all day long. And she's the one in like the beginning of 2018. She's the one that she's like, you need treatment. Yeah. I look back and I laugh about it now because an alcoholic is telling me that I need treatment. That's how bad I was. That's how bad I looked. I was dying. So that's when I started this path that got me down here. I started doing treatment, the whole, detox, up there. It's called CSS, TSA. It's like PHP, IOP, just different names for different states. So I went through all that and stayed. And then up until the beginning of last year, I couldn't stay sober longer than like 4 or 5 months for 2018, 2019. Yeah. It's pretty much 3 or 4 months. I'd stay, I get sober and I would just go out and get annihilated, go on. That put me homeless a couple times out of treatment too, staying in motels and hotels and ended up in hospitals. Yeah. It takes what it takes to get you where you are. And then finally, so my clean date, my sober date, my clean day, whatever you want to call it, is March 14th of 2020.
Oh, I'm March 10th. I'm March 10th, 2020.
No, March 14th of 2021. So I'm coming up on 15 months.
Cool. Congratulations.
Thanks. But so when I came to Florida in 2020 because I've been back in jail back in 2020 when COVID was going on for like a month or two for stealing a car when I was drunk. I got out and I was at my mother's, and my sister lives there with a couple of her kids, and I was just drunk all the time. And they were like, listen, you can't be here anymore. I was just sleeping on their couch, drunk every day. I wasn't working. I wasn't doing anything. So they had just had enough. It wasn't safe for the kids to see me like that. And, I understood that. So I went back into treatment, and I went to a place in Millbury, Mass called Sunrise, which they have one here in Fort Lauderdale. It's the same company. I had done my detox there for like 7 or 8 days, and they were like, hey, we have a place down in Florida we'd like you to go to if you're interested in further treatment. No, I'm like, no, I don't want to go down there. But it ended up being the best thing that ever happened. Because I came down here, I stayed sober 4 or 5 months, and I fell off pretty bad. And I went on a 5-month blackout, put me in the hospital a bunch of times, and I almost died down here. And, I woke up in the hospital at the beginning of March last year, and everything was different. Everything changed. I got out of the hospital and everything felt different. And I did everything different.
What happened that made things feel different?
I woke up in the hospital and I just felt different. Like I didn't feel like I always felt. I didn't wake up in the hospital and rip everything out of me and want to go to, want to walk out and just go to the liquor store like I had done in those 5 months. I had done several other times. I had been in the hospital 5 or 6 times in that 5-month blackout period. I don't know. I woke up and, God did for me what I couldn't do for myself. I woke up and the obsession had been lifted from me, and I got out of that hospital and I put some work in. I started working with my sponsor. I started did my 90 and 90. Started doing, writing, doing my step work. You know, things changed slowly, but surely things started changing. And I haven't looked back since. I've had some ups and downs, but you know, nothing that's ever made me want to go back out and drink. You know?
That's great. Sounds like you're doing well. So what do you do nowadays to keep yourself busy and keep yourself sober?
Well, I go to the gym. You know, I try to go to the gym at least 4 or 5 times a week. I go to meetings 3 or 4 times a week. I'm part of a sponsorship family, which I don't go every week to that, but you know, I go most of the time. I do AA and NA. My first sponsor took me through the steps of NA. Currently working with a sponsor in AA as well. I have been procrastinating a little bit on my step 4. You know, I know, you know, I know that it's just me prioritizing certain things in life that I need to do this right now because I'm very busy. I have meetings, the gym, work, you know, I have sponsees, you know, I'm doing all this other stuff. So my step work it's not that important right now. I had just gone through the steps last year with NA. So, but I mean, I'm not like brushing it off, but you know, I know that my recovery is first. And I know that by prioritizing it second is why I'm not getting through my 4th step in a timely manner. But I work for I got a job. I started doing volunteer work last March. When I got out of the hospital, I went into a halfway house and I started doing volunteer work until I got a job for this place called Restoration Bridge. So it's a nonprofit that we distribute food to people that are, you know, suffering food insecurities in Palm Beach County. So I did that, you know, while I was working, the days that I wasn't working, I would volunteer with them. I volunteered with them for a few months and they offered me a job as their warehouse manager. So I wasn't sure if I wanted to leave construction because I did construction my whole life. I always made great money, and what they were offering me, I was, you know, a significant amount less than I'm used to making. So I talked to a lot of people like I was told to do, and I prayed about it for a whole month like I was told and taught to do. And I took the job, and that was a game changer in my life as well. I needed that job in my early recovery to keep me sober because it's 90% volunteer work there, and everybody that volunteers there, out of the 90% volunteers, probably 95% of them are in recovery themselves.
Okay.
So I'm around people in recovery all day long, you know, and I get to, now that I'm the warehouse manager, I've been the warehouse manager over a year there now. Guys from treatment centers come in different days and they volunteer and help out. And I get to talk to them and like give advice and suggestions and tell them how I did it. And, you know, that in itself is like recovery and working at the same time. So I'm blessed with the job that I have, you know, and I finally just got to, you know, I have a couple of sponsees that I'm working with, you know, and like I said, and my wife is, I got married last August. My wife is in recovery as well. And I couldn't be more blessed to have a woman like her in my life because we don't work on we work our programs separately, but we help each other with recovery at the same time. Like I never knew that I could live with somebody and just like have the conversations like I'm having with you right now on a daily basis. Like the things that I'm going through, like the things that I was taught to take to my sponsor, I do take to my sponsor. I take to both of my sponsors. I take it to my recovery community, but I also have a woman that I can talk to about this stuff at home and vice versa. So like I'm involved like 24/7 almost, like with my, with something to do with recovery now. And it's been that way for over a year. So, that's what keeps me sober today. And I've been making amends to people in my family, and things are just working out right. And I just take it one day at a time, like we're told to do. Sometimes it's 1 minute at a time, to be honest.
Do what you gotta do.
Sometimes it's 1 minute at a time, man. Some days are fucked up, some days are like great, but nothing's bad enough to take me back out today. I'm learning how to deal with it each and every day. Like different things come up each and every day, life on life's terms. And that, that's something that I'm going to have to learn to deal with for the rest of my life. And I've accepted that, and I pray and I meditate, and I have a routine every morning, and I have a routine. I do my 10th step every night. I try to keep myself in the step where in 10, 11, and 12, the best that I can every day,
That's
but I'm
what you gotta
human.
do.
Yeah. And I'm human, I fuck up all the time, all the time, but I don't drink and I don't drug. So
That's all that matters.
I'm successful. Yeah.
So my last question for you, do you have any advice for people watching and listening?
Yeah. I do a commitment every Tuesday. Me and my wife, we've been doing a commitment for this treatment center to PHP. We've been going down there for about a year now. She brings a speaker in one Tuesday. I bring a speaker in the other Tuesday. And it's one of my favorite questions that I ask everybody. So I'll ask everybody this at home. Obviously I can't see you, but I have the people in the treatment center by show of hands. Who's been affected with death by drugs and alcohol in their life? Who's experienced loss through drugs and alcohol in their life? And, the majority of the people raise their hand at these meetings. And then I tell them, how many people know somebody that's died doing a 12-step program? And never have I seen anybody raise their hand. And I'm pretty sure that I'm never going to see anybody ever raise their hand, So take the chance, do what's freely given. It's been freely given to me. It's something that I pushed off and didn't believe for the longest time. If I want to go out and get drunk and get high, I can anytime I want, anytime I want. How's it going to hurt you to try doing something different? It works for me. It can work for them. It can work for you. It can work for everybody. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Try it. If you don't like it, you can always go back to the life that you had. What's it going to hurt? What are you going to lose? If anything, you're going to gain something out of it. You're going to gain some knowledge, some experience, some wisdom, some self-respect, some dignity. All the things that I experienced, everybody can experience.
That's great. That's great. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today.
I appreciate you having me, man. This is cool.
Yeah. Did you have anything else you wanted to throw in there?
No. It's this is part of, they tell you service work, helping others is helping yourself at the same time.
Yep.
I'm grateful that this is out there. You have this out there for people to do, because I spoke to you about how, in my experience, how I suffered through social anxiety all of my life and feeling, less than, by speaking to people and telling my story and getting connected with the community around me has made me a completely different person. It's taken me from being the selfish, self-centered asshole that I always was to being a little bit more loving and caring towards other people, which in turn teaches me how to love and care for myself, in turn teaches me how to love and care for you. And, that's the circle I want to be in. That's the cycle I want to be in. I don't want to be using sick, going making money, getting sick. I don't want to be in that vicious cycle no more.
No, I think all of us we love when we're released from that life. It feels like getting out of some type of jail.
Yeah, it's freedom.
It is absolute freedom. So yeah, if that's all that we got for everybody watching and listening. If you like what you heard and saw, go below and give us a like. Also subscribe to the channel. You'll see when we upload new videos. You could check us out on Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, TikTok. We're on all of those platforms. You can see different updates that we have daily. And the last thing is I suggest you check out one of our daily Zoom meetings. We have one every night at 6:30. So that's all we have for today. And until next time.